as a writer and a writer only, you wouldn't really have that. A lot of times directors and stuff
Okay.
get kind of pissed off when people do that. So I would avoid it if you could. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Fix Stories. I am one of your hosts, Jared Moses, and I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Jaylon. We have our friend from Substack that we've been chatting with a long time over the interwebs, and now we finally get to meet in person to talk about an actual story in the works. So thank you so much for joining us, Jason. Do you want to introduce
Thank
yourself?
you so much for having me. Yeah, very grateful for the opportunity. Jay Corso is my pen name, and I'm a fan of storytelling in all forms. I am not attached to any one form, and that's part of this writing challenge also. Like if I write in this, meaning let's say the traditional short story format, can I also write for the visual medium of film and TV? Got to write for audio drama or podcast where like now sound is the more dominant element? Can I write for comics that you have where it's more symbols, almost like a sort of symbolic way of telling a narrative? And so that's part of the challenge. Like I love doing that. Like if I'm able to do that, it's like working a different set of muscles. So that's where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. So today we are going to talk about the story you submitted, which is another screenplay. This is our second screenplay that we've had, and I always love talking screenplays. I love talking prose, but I love screenplays. So we're going to go over that today. But before we jump into that, we want to get the background on this. Like why did you write this? Where did it come from? All the good stuff.
All right. So let me see. I hope my apologies if I kind of go in tangents and circle around. Like that's how my brain works, and the creative process to a certain degree is like that too. But okay, I am going to put a video of this in the near future, and I'll share that with you guys. But the best way I can explain it right now is there was a short film that I made with some people. There was a prop. There was a prop goggles. It was like a made up VR goggles. When we were done with that, I kept the goggles. It was just kind of I was thinking like Roger Corman a little bit, like, well, what else can I do with these? Not throw them away yet because I paid for someone to make them, an artist to make them for me. And gradually, I start building like an outfit, and I come up with the idea of a superhero, but not a superhero like we do now, where unfortunately we're kind of flooded in superheroes. Rather, I was coming from the place of a superhero like Darkman. Like remember Darkman the movie, where you
Mhm.
have a superhero, quotation marks, quote unquote superhero, but a superhero that has more in common with the Shadow, with the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and perhaps Batman. And arguably, this is just a little thing with me. The Shadow influenced the creation of Batman. The Shadow predates Batman by a few years. And I'm fascinated with these pulp era characters who they're more violent, that they kill. Like they don't have the moral restraints of modern characters. Like I guess I call them pulp, but in the context of not, they'd be grindhouse. And like so Darkman had that, and I thought, okay, this character is like that, but like, why does he do that? And it's because, well, something was done to him. He was a scientist, just like Peyton from Darkman, who something was done to him, and he is fighting evil with greater evil, by just flat out killing them and just turning them against each other and taking their money and then using that money to fund his research. So
Mhm.
it's sort of like a reverse. I'm gonna call it a reverse story arc, in that the typical story arc is, darkness into brightness, and here you have the opposite. You have like brightness into darkness. You have someone whose life was already was together,
Mhm.
and his life is just ruined, and because of what happened to him, there's really no hope of going back to a normal life, and he just, he's stuck in that kind of shadow world. And their challenge is also how to make this relatable, how to make someone like that relatable to an audience. So the story behind the story, the mythology, let's call it, is the whole found thing. Like how like there's movies that are coming out now that are like found items, like New York Ninja. Like the story behind that is so fascinating. How they found this footage, and I forget who, if it was a Vinegar Syndrome or one of the distributors, one of these like boutique distributors, took the video or the footage, the film footage, transferred it to digital, built a story around it, and then they had audio. And I thought that is so like clever and funny. Like it's almost like a long-term collaboration. And that back in the 80s, they made this movie. I guess the production company ran out of money. They went bankrupt. So this thing just sat in cans of 35 millimeter film unfinished. And decades later, the digital age kind of gives it a second chance, but it also adds the extra touch of the director adding to the thing before. So I found that very exciting. And then there's other things too. Like I made a video not too long ago on a book called Shock Nation. I think it's called Shock Nation or Shock Festival, one of the two. The book is a compendium of grindhouse films. Like there's interviews with directors, writers, stars. There's like a whole bunch of posters that have that grindhouse energy, but they're all fake. It's not real. But the totality, the aggregate of the book is so entertaining and so much fun that you wish it was a real thing. Like you wish that was real. So I started going, okay, so this is a character. His name is Night Vision, or rather, that's the name he gave himself because he only comes out at night and he has these goggles that have built-in prismatic, so he can see in different frequencies. You know, they like night vision goggles. He has outlines for to be able to see people because his eyes, he can't really see through his eyes anymore. He can register, he can adjust the frequency to see data transfer. He can see electricity. So he uses these things. That's kind of his superpower, I guess. But the idea is that this is a found item too. This is something that was made in the late 1980s or in the early 90s. There was only enough money for one season. And it's one of those things that people barely know about. And that partially that comes from whenever I would talk about movies. I mentioned a movie called Patrick, an Australian horror film from the 1970s. For a long time, until not quite Hollywood came out and kind of featured the movie in it, parts of the movie. I would mention that movie and nobody knew what I was talking about. And eventually that started messing with my mind. I'm like, did I imagine this trailer? That I just conjure a trailer out of nowhere, like completely? And then that, okay, oh, all right, yeah, it's true. And I like the idea of like, hey, you ever remember Night Vision? Like, no, what are you talking about? Like, no, I don't remember anything like that. So that's from that. And at first it's like it seeps into the culture in little bits and pieces. Like first there's marketing items like photos. I'll share some of those you when you want to post this later on if you want to. And then gradually there's a script. And maybe later on there's a whole episode. You know, if I'm able to get to a point where I can do that, I may try a trailer or something like that. It's just this thing that just seeps its way into the culture in little bits and pieces and little nuggets of information. So that's kind of the whole totality behind that script.
Okay.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I agree. So now that we have the background on that, let's like dive into the actual meat and potatoes of the story. So what we don't normally like to
Let's
do
see.
is we start with what's working, and then we go with what needs work, and then we try to touch on a theme if we were able to find it, and that's pretty much how it ultimately goes. Jaylon, if you want to give the disclaimers that we normally try to give to everybody.
Well, we definitely appreciate you sharing the story behind the story because that's exactly why I think these editing sessions work best when we get like in a panel discussion with the writers, because your edits are not going to be helpful unless you understand the writer's vision and the story behind their vision, so then you can better help them to reach it. That said, all of our advice is subjective, and everything ultimately comes down to what is right for your conscience with this story that is yours. So, if you have any thoughts throughout all of this, we want this to be a discussion and not just like us giving you our perspective. So, any other notes you have to like add in, any more information that can maybe change our suggestions or any pushback that you have, definitely throw that in there. Feel free to interrupt us at any point throughout this. Yeah, we just want it to be a discussion and a collaboration because that's where the best ideas come from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, no. All right, go ahead. Just rip it apart. I can take it.
All right, so we'll start with what's working. Jaylon, usually I let you go first, so you can start us off.
Okay. So the first thing that jumped out at me, I was actually reading this screenplay as we were riding in the car doing errands, and I burst out laughing at the line, "I'm not a fan of soy burgers, but did you have to go that far?" And then I read that line completely out of context to my husband, and he also burst out laughing. So automatically the humor for Kata, that character, is spot on. Another thing that jumped out at me is as like a really cool, unique idea is that shot that you described of in the opening scene where the glare of Night Vision's goggles is bouncing off of the menu that the character is reading. And that's the thing that kind of clues you into like building the suspense of, oh, someone's watching. I thought that was a very creative and effective shot that I haven't seen used before. That made me excited because I was like, ooh, something new, like a creative idea. I also noticed within those first few sequences, there was this really cool nonchalance that Night Vision had as he was being established as a vicious killer. And it was very effective at making him a terrifying anti-hero. So that also was my initial thought of him. And I think that if you lean into that, that would be a super cool way to like pull people in, and get them both terrified and fascinated by this character. Those are the notes that I have on the first 45 pages. I'll turn it over to Jared.
Okay.
Right.
So for me, I thought that there was some strong visual world building. Now, this is as well with a lot of the what's working. There's a lot of double-edged swords to it in the sense that like where you did well, it also kind of bites you in the butt on the on the back end. But there is solid world building in the sense that you created very vivid images of places. So from the night visions goggles to the bar's rooftop, the industrial hallways, the robots, the gel-like vats, all of these things are really vivid and detailed to sort of giving me a vision of what you want. It tells me that you knew in your brain you have a vision of what this is supposed to be like and what this is supposed to look like, and that was very clear to me. There was also hand in hand with that, I would say there's clear physical geography. So when we start talking about like the layout of a room or like how the hallways are, the doorways or the labs, getting a really clear picture of like, well, what do these rooms look like and what's happening in them was very, very consistent. And it gave a lot of clarity to where these characters were. So that was solid. I would also say that you had some themes. So I would say that I struggled with finding theme at first, but then after really reviewing my notes and reviewing what I'd read, I would say there were some, it felt like they weren't intentional, but they were there, which is like one, you can't escape the consequences of violence. Two, your past eventually will confront you, and technology is eroding humanity. These were the things that really stood out to me as messages that I were like, this is very interesting. And so, yeah, I think that those were the things that were really, really working for me.
Okay. Well, I'm probably going to sound ignorant by saying this, but when I write, I tend not to think in themes. I'm thinking story, emotion, and I guess suspense. Like, if you know, like I guess I've tried to do it in the past. Like, what is this about? But
Mhm.
if I do that, I kind of get blocked. I can't really write because it's like, well, I feel my concern is more personally for me. I'm not saying this is everybody should do that. My concern is what happens next should be take priority over, like how do I feel about what's going to happen next? Like let it
Mhm.
happen and then maybe later on. So I tend to just it's almost like blah, like I just that's kind of how I write. And then afterwards, oh, okay, that's what it was about. And it's way almost it's like I have to wait for people to tell me what it is. I don't really know. I'm just thinking this is kind of cool and this is kind of scary and this is suspenseful and this is emotional. Like I'm like that, I guess. I'm a little well on the spectrum when it comes to storytelling. It's more like raw emotion and like a sort of I guess a certain heat of storytelling. Like I want to make it feel breathless and like manic and restless.
Yeah. That makes sense. So here's my thing. I think that when it comes to storytelling, storytelling is like martial arts in the sense that it's writing is a discipline, and there are different schools of thought when it comes to writing. I used to write that way as well in the sense that like for instance when it comes to filmmaking, when it comes to the idea of directing something or something like that, my thought process is always I feel my way through it. I don't think about what does it mean, what is the philosophy behind what I'm trying to say here. I know what I want the audience to feel, and so that's where we aim for. And that's how I kind of communicate that vision to everybody that I'm talking to is like, okay, when we do this, this is what I want them to feel. I don't know what is necessary to make that happen, but let's figure out how to make them feel that way. When it comes to writing, like a screenplay, when it comes to prose, for me, theme is very, very important. I have to start with what I want to say. I already know that technically speaking, when people pick it up or people read it, everybody else is going to have their own interpretation of what it means, and that's fine. But I like to make sure that I know what I wanted to say. But when I used to write, that was definitely my thought process. It was like, I just want to tell a really cool story, and whatever happens, happens. And then, like, I'll figure out what it means later. So I totally get that. And there's no right or wrong way.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way. Whatever works for you is what works, I think.
Ultimately, I've found in my work as a developmental and line editor that all the answers to questions that people have about plot and character and story beats are all answered by theme. So when you start with a purpose of why you're writing the story and what message you're trying to send, everything else, every other element of your story builds off of that. That's the benefit of like having that decided first, because you ultimately end up doing less drafts because there's less going back and editing things to be like post thought hanging off of this theme. But there is, like Jared said, like reiterating, it's a different process for everyone. And the one way that seems the most efficient to someone else might, like you said, cause creative blocks that like you start feeling paralyzed by having to have everything figured out all at once, and you have no raw material with that raw passion to work with. So there is a different process for everyone. And I think that knowing yourself that well automatically makes you a storyteller that's leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else, because you're not going to, you know, what all the other advice of all the different schools of thought out there may be that's thrown at you. You already know what works for you. So now you can just keep working with that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I actually had not thought of that about like being connected to everything else, but it's something I'll be thinking about. I'm sure it's going to influence whatever I do in the near
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, it's similar to what Jay Lama was saying. It's one of those things that, like, if you decide to put theme first, I always find that it does genuinely connect everything. So for me, for example, when I do a theme, I'll pick what I want to talk about, what I want it to be about, and then I'll create. So let's say I have a thematic idea. So let's say we say vengeance is bad, like that as the most like basic theme I can think of. Like vengeance is bad. Then I will take that and I'll make it an extreme. So we say vengeance is the worst thing that could ever happen. And then you put it on a scale and you put the opposite of that. So vengeance is the best thing that could ever happen. And then I take my characters and I place them along that scale, and I build everything around their personality, who they are, their identity, around their stand on this perspective. And then the entire movie, book, or story or whatever is tied to these different ideas, ideals, thoughts, and viewpoints bashing against one another until the end, where the argument is finally either proven or disproven. And that's how I like to do it. I think it creates a more cohesive story when you do it that way. But I think like I said, everybody's different and everybody does things differently. But just as a thought, if you do ever try to do it, see if that might work for you and the stories that you're trying to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I mean, what you said, I like that. If when you make, there's your theme that you mentioned. Let's say stay with the theme you suggested, but then you bring the opposite of that. Like it's the best thing ever. And my issue that I notice in Hollywood movies is when this theme that contradicts the main theme, the counterpoint to that, is usually underwritten because they want to support the main idea.
Right.
And I'm someone like I want to leave morals out of that. Like I'm more about you make up your mind about what that is. And Hollywood, they tend to, movies that are, for a particular audience, like the most generic, most broadest audience that you want, they will do that. They will do support that idea. And I don't have anything against that, but I tend to prefer no, like you decide what it is. Maybe that runs counter to the industry, but like because you're treating people like adults and letting them make up their own minds about
For sure.
violence versus counter violence. But that's the thing. Like they want to tell you, they're already kind of telegraphing, well, no,
What you
like
should think.
yeah. So with that, if you give the counterpoint equal weight, like you present how would I say, compelling arguments. For example, like let's take Training Day for example. Like Denzel Washington's character, he's evil. He does a lot of evil things, but he's not entirely wrong about what he does. He does address how the movie. I guess the movie's theme is how in trying to fight evil, you become evil yourself. But it makes compelling arguments about how his methods do produce results. It's just there's a very thin line that he's probably just going like this all the time, and at some point he just completely crossed it over. So that's what I mean. Like that's a movie that actually makes a compelling argument. It doesn't make him just plain banal or plain evil. He's a very compelling, fascinating, magnetic character.
Agreed. And here's the thing, and this is for other writers that are listening as well, that I think that every story that you tell, every story, no matter the medium, every story you tell is a conversation. So it needs to be. This is why leading with theme is important, because it's the same as if I sit down with you in a room to talk to you and we have nothing to talk about. We're just talking about random things. Although that can be fun, it is oftentimes not a productive conversation. However, if I come to you and I say, hey, listen, I want to talk to you about the value of vengeance and why we should or should not have it. The whole point of that conversation is that your side of the conversation is I leave space for you to be able to share your thoughts. Your characters are the ones who are holding that conversation, and you have to be able to give each and every one of them space to hold their perspective on the conversation. And then, like you said, at the end, the reader can decide who was right in this entire conversation. Think of it as like a panel. Yeah, think of it as like a panel conversation. Your book or your script or your movie or whatever is a panel conversation between characters about a specific topic. And then, like I said, you, the viewer, get to decide whose perspective they're into. Similar to you mentioned Training Day, I would even throw out Black Panther as a great example of
Mm,
like
yeah.
Killmonger is a great example of a character that we would all say, oh, well, it's fair to say
Mm.
he's probably right.
Yes,
But then you're
yes.
like, oh, so you have Black Panther, who he's the heroes. So it holds space for that kind of conversation. And I think you have to allow yourself to do that too for your readers as well.
Yeah, that's a great example too. Yes.
And
Very
something
nice
else
example.
that you mentioned, Jay, that like very much I wanted to dig into it because you're right that so many stories don't treat us like adults because they don't trust that we can understand nuance. And granted, a lot of people can't. But I think the stories that are really powerful are the ones that don't have black and white lines, but they explore those gray areas. So maybe what Jared was saying, you decide, the audience decides which character is right or wrong. Maybe there's no character that's 100% right and no character that's 100%.
Mm,
Maybe there's
yes.
is that nuance. Even still, like that's a tension that I think stories like this screenplay that you wrote really explore well because you have an anti-hero as your protagonist. And that's a great way to explore like this is the protagonist, we're rooting for them, but we also understand that they are a complicated character and they have both good and bad in their personality. And just because they're the main character doesn't mean that the story is telling me that everything about them is admirable and I should imitate it.
Agreed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. A great point. Yeah. In my own life, like the stories that stay with me the most are those, the ones that leave you in like in a morally ambiguous place. You're thinking about it for days afterward. You're looking for some place to like kind of set yourself in, but you can't because it's so good. Like all the characters make compelling arguments for their particular viewpoint, and you're not sure where to. And I like that a lot. So yeah, great point, great observation. Yeah.
Okay. So now we're gonna move to the what needs work part of
Okay.
things. Jaylon, you can kick us off with your thoughts.
Okay, all of these again are conversation starters, not necessarily objective opinions. The first thing, this isn't necessarily, it doesn't fall under like what's working, what's not working, in so much as it was just an interesting note. You can take it for what you will. But I really thought that both Kimball and Jenner were females at first when I was reading their lines. And I don't know, like once I saw the pronoun for each of them, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I wonder if it might be something fun for you to play with. You can either adjust their tones so that they come across like a little bit more gruff and tough and less carefree and sassy, or you can really play, you can maybe lean into that and say like, hey, throw a random female in there as the barkeeper who had her bar destroyed and she's having to like stand up to all of these people who are walking all over her trying to like criticize her improvements on the place and not pay their tab and all that.
Okay. Oh,
Just
yeah,
a
very good. I like that though. That's a cool idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that you like to write a lot of action stories that lean into that very masculine superhero. So I don't want to like ruin it by saying like you have to have a female in here because realistically there may not be a female in their world. But it was just interesting that like their tones read as female to me.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Another line that kind of like read to me as different than maybe you wrote it was when Night Vision and Bolton are fighting and Bolton says, "You think you're police? You think they're going to be cool with what you just did?" And the second part like sounded really great. The first part kind of confused me. It felt a little weak because it doesn't make sense that Bolton would think that Night Vision thinks he's the police because Night Vision kind of like just comes in unapologetically as the villain. But I wonder if that line could still be kept, but write it in a different tone. So like I know for me, when I'm in a situation of like really high stress and anxiety and like a lot of adrenaline, I can't think of words. And the words that I think of sound absolutely stupid. If like that first part of the sentence was kind of showing that adrenaline that Bolton is running off of and the fear that he has. And so it comes out as, "You think you're the police?" And then like he has to stop himself and like stutter and go back and try and like rephrase it to sound actually threatening.
Hmm.
Again, like another random idea just to think about, just because in my head it didn't make that first part of the sentence didn't make sense.
Okay. Okay. Totally. I'll consider it.
The next thing that I had there, the anchor woman on TV. This was like another thing that like I just needed a little bit more explanation about because it didn't make sense to my brain. But the line, the police have not released the identity of what they are now calling the Tattletale Massacre. It seemed like it may just be a copy edit, but it seemed like it just needed a little bit more clarity to make sense that like they're not releasing the identity of something that they just named.
Okay, yeah, I guess I didn't establish the name of the place early on. Again, I guess this is the thing that I like to do. Like I like to deliberately confuse you in small ways, confuse people because again, the storytelling that I tend to like the most is the one that kind of throws you into the middle of things. And it can feel disorienting at first, but if you just usually at least the best ones, the best writers, if you just kind of relax and go with it, eventually you start it all connects. Like say, I don't know if you ever had a chance to read William Gibson, like a Neuromancer or Johnny Mnemonic. Like the first time I read those two stories, like the novel and the short story, it was so exciting because of that, because the prose that particular way Whit Gibson has of writing, it's almost like anxiety inducing. But again, if you just keep going and don't resist, what he's doing, eventually it all connects. And I like the fact that you make it work in your brain. You don't need to have like the writer explain it to you. It just all comes together. And I think I'm trying to do that, but maybe I'm not at that level.
I think it's a really tricky line to walk because, like you said, like that is so genius when writers can do that. But I
Yes.
think it maybe takes them a few drafts to realize what's something that can be left ambiguous and what's something that just stands as a contradiction. Because you want to have ambiguity when it builds suspense, but you don't want to have ambiguity when it creates a contradiction. Because then people don't trust your storytelling because they said like, well, he's contradicting himself. And if it's not something that becomes clear later, then that's something that like, okay, it was kind of left as an open-ended contradiction, kind of seems like a plot hole almost in that sense. So it kind of just takes a few drafts to realize what's something that can like be ambiguous and build tension until it's explained, or what's something that is just left open-ended as a contradiction.
Okay, I will definitely take that into account. Yeah, because when you're doing these things, you think this is awesome, but when we start getting outside opinion, it's like, oh, okay, I should think about this. Yeah, strike that balance between just a little bit of misdirection, but way too much where people just tune out because you frustrate them.
Right. Yep. And that is like, this is a whole drafting process. And that's where like we're coming in just to like kind of get the ball rolling on the brainstorms to get you to that next draft, because we're not expecting any draft to be perfect as it is. Again, like you said, when you're so close to the story, you're writing it yourself, you kind of become blind to some of these mistakes because it makes sense in your brain and you just forgot that you didn't write it on the page. So it might not make sense.
All right, then. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Okay, I only have 3 more things. One of them is another small one. One of them's a little bit overarching, and then one of them I think Jared can maybe address more than me because he's worked more with screenplays than I have. Night Vision's tone in general kind of, to me, read as if he slipped in and out of what seemed like his individual voice. So, for example, sometimes he spoke with contractions and sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he seemed like kind of verbally laid back and like open, conversing with Kata and like, making personal jokes about her like chums. But then at other times he seems like he speaks with more resigned and uptight, like you're on a need to know basis. This is only business. It seems like he has those barriers. So I think that his tone just needs to be more consistent so that we can trust him as a character, so that he's not flip-flopping back and forth between, like if he does flip-flop, because all of humans have both sides, like make it make sense for the situation specifically that he's in or what he's feeling in that moment.
Okay.
If that
All
makes sense.
right, then. Yes, it did actually, and I will look at that. I think I was somewhat aware of that myself, but I left that anyway.
Fair.
But I can definitely look at it again now with this idea, with this perspective you gave me.
There you go. And then the last small thing, there's one line at the very end where I had gotten into the story and I was just reading, and then I looked up. I was like, oh, I read a few more pages than I think I was supposed to. But there was this line where Night Vision calls Kavano a monster, and I started questioning. I was like, I wonder if Night Vision would call him a monster, even if he feels it like internally and he knows it internally and he's like fighting against him as a monster. I wonder if he would have that ability to say it out loud, because it seemed like there was so much conflict in his own mind over what he's done in order to like kind of the end justifies the means. Like when we first see him, he's murdering a group of people and destroying an entire bar for seemingly no reason. So there's this conflict of like, would he call someone a monster if he also subconsciously feels like a monster himself, because committing all these crimes in order to get, he's justifying them, but maybe it's still affecting his conscience in a way, you know?
I would
Yeah,
say to
well,
that though,
that's. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say to Jaylon that like, well, this is also just a cool part about what we do is that we can also have differing opinions about things.
Yes.
But I would wonder if he might actually say that he's a monster because people very rarely know themselves well enough to be able to. So maybe he doesn't think he's a monster. And so it's more of that I'm reflecting that back at you. And so the audience is saying, look at yourself. You know, you're not exactly kind of like when Batman confronts people like the Joker or whatever, and we say, you know, he's like, "Oh, you're a madman. You're crazy for doing the things you're doing." But then it's like, as the watcher, I'm like, "What? You know, Batman, you're a little
It's like,
crazy too." So,
exactly, yeah.
so,
He just happens
so
to be doing something that in his eyes makes him better than the Joker, I guess. And I
exactly,
guess he
and
has the rule of no killing, and somehow that makes it better, I guess.
for sure. But then if you think about somebody like maybe the Punisher, for instance, who doesn't have that rule, he doesn't necessarily think that he's wrong in what he's doing. You know, in his mind, everything that he's doing, and that's the way most characters are. They're always justified in their actions and in the things that they're doing. So it makes sense that logically, Night Vision may not see himself as a monster. Instead, he may see himself as a necessary judgment. And as so, him calling someone else a monster is more of a lack of self-awareness than it is, you know, he's this I mean, obviously, anybody who goes out into the streets at night to beat people up and kill people is clearly not mentally stable in any way, shape, or form. So maybe he's not this well-adjusted individual who's like, you know, I know I have my shit together, so like, you know, you should get your shit together, Cavano. But it's like, no, you have some work to do yourself, bro. And so at least that's how I would see it.
So this really is a great example of like, you know, we have our perspective and we can kind of reflect back to you like, these are some of the thoughts that are in our head, because this is a very revealing line right here, but it's going to ultimately come down to you and how you see the character as the author.
Yeah, I'm gonna think more about that because yeah, first of all, I had this interesting perspective where like pro and con at the same time. But now that I'm thinking more about it, I think when he said that, he wasn't thinking so much of the condition he's in at the end of the script, but rather what he does, because he's supposed to be like this ultra rich guy who funds wars, and I think it's more in the context of what he does with his money, how he makes his money. I think that's where it comes from. And the fact that I think, you know, he's partly responsible. I actually haven't worked out this full mythology, but he may be responsible. Like he may have sent those goons to do what happened to Night Vision because he wanted the tech. And maybe
Yeah.
Night Vision wasn't going to sell it. Like I haven't worked out, but you actually just put the seeds in my mind, and maybe that's what happened. Maybe that's why he's so like hell bent for this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, in collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that another idea maybe to kind of strike that balance is maybe instead of you're a monster, because when I think of like people who use money in those kinds of ways, the first thought that comes to my mind is not you're a monster, but you're disgusting. So maybe that's what he says.
Okay.
Yeah, there's so much room there to play with it. And these are just ideas to get you thinking about how you want it to come across.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that was cool. That was actually one of those like moral moments in a movie that can make people wonder and talk and discuss. Movies used to do that, I guess. Movies used to get people to argue them, and sadly, modern movies don't really do that. They don't really do anything.
I think that's why we love doing this show so much, because it's a chance for us to like really have those in-depth conversations with a writer about like, what is your moral thought here? What is your understanding of this psychological argument for a character? And I think that having those debates in this setting where we can actually talk with the writer is so cool. So thank you for being willing to engage.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate the time.
Yeah. Okay, so the last thing, and I'll probably just use this as a starting point to pass it back over to Jared. But some of the action heavy and detailed cut sequences, my attention kept drifting just because it was so technical. Like you said, you write with a very detailed vision, and the OCD makes you have to get that across exactly as it comes into your mind in a technical way. So that might be a strength, but I'll let Jared take this away to be like, help us figure out how we can utilize the strength while also making it so that other people can enter into it from their perspective.
Okay.
Okay. So the first thing I will say is that when I first started, I don't know how long you've been writing screenplays, but I know me, when I first started writing screenplays, the thing that I had to separate in my mind, and this is again for viewers and listeners who are new to screenwriting, you have to learn to separate yourself from it in the perspective of you're not a viewer and this is not a movie. This is not a TV show, what you're writing. This is a blueprint for the movie or the TV show they're going to make. So in our minds, because we spend more time, we first are viewers. I think every screenwriter is a viewer before they are a writer. So we spend so much time watching movies, watching TV shows, and when we visualize how we're writing it, we see our story in that way. But what we don't take into consideration is all of the little technical bits that come with writing, that filming a thing. So like when you're like, oh, he comes, not that you said this, but like when you put in a screenplay, somebody comes speeding down a street in a red minivan, and it flips over and it does an end over end and yada yada, and you're doing all of that. You're not taking into consideration the fact that when you film this, you may not have the road for that kind of thing, or you may not be able to get a van, or you may not be able to do these other things, and so you're seeing this whole. You get so locked into the vision that you have that you don't leave any room for the filmmakers. Because if you're not going to direct it yourself, and that's another difference too. If you were going to direct this, then you can really put whatever you want in your screenplay, and structure really isn't that important. As long as people can understand it and understand what you're trying to say, you can do it. Like if you look, perfect example is someone like Quentin Tarantino, who does a very different style of the way he writes his screenplays, or somebody like I want to say maybe Christopher Nolan.
Christopher
Yeah,
Nolan. Like
these are people
he writes more technically complex film than Tarantino. There's a
and
lot of
so,
like stuff, visual gadgets and things like that, where Tarantino shoots in very common places. They're decorated differently, but it's common. He's not shooting in like science fiction sets, places with
right.
like high tech devices and things like that.
Exactly. And then if you also think about, let's say, like Mad Max Fury Road, for instance, if you've ever seen the screenplay for that, where it's pretty much like pictures and funny fonts and all this other stuff, like that works because the person who wrote it is most likely going to be the one to direct it. So they don't need to do that. But if you're just going to write it, give it to somebody else, you need to make it as clear for them to understand, as well as giving them the creative, collaborative freedom to do what they want to do with it. So I say that I just want to preface all of this by saying that.
Okay.
So the first thing that jumped out at me was when I first, for me, and this is going to kind of sound like contradictory to what I just said, but when I'm reading the screenplay, I do visualize how it's going to look. Not when I'm writing it, but when I'm reading it, I have to try to visualize it. Keep in mind too, real quick, back to my original statement, it's not me saying you should not visualize your story. You absolutely should. I feel like that's the only way to write it. However, I want to say don't get too romantic about the details of everything, because a lot of that stuff is probably not going to make it into the film. And even if it does, it's probably not going to be exactly the way that you described it. So don't get caught up on the like super, you don't need to say he was driving a Ford 1995 with rusted patches, and unless that's absolutely necessary to the story, you don't need to say that. You can just say he was driving a car. Let the filmmakers decide what's going to be used. So that's what I mean by you can visualize it, but you don't need to be specific about everything unless it specifically serves the story. So back to the original statement. The opening for this to me dragged a bit, because what caught my eye when I read the document was that, okay, this is season 1, episode 4 of a thing. Now, you've given me a little bit more background on this so that it's like, oh, this is more like found stuff. So it's like, there's not a full season that exists. This is just kind of for an idea. But my original diving in was like, okay, this is the 4th episode of a season. All of this extra stuff that's happening, stuff that we're talking, I feel like the viewer would have already known, and we're just taking too long to get to the point. So I would have, instead of having the conversation about the food in the bar and all that other stuff, which really it never came up again. It was never, the soy burgers never was conversation ever again. Nobody ever said anything about it. So we didn't need to see it. So I would have started the episode with night vision bursting in and doing the fight. I want to grab the viewer by the throat immediately.
Okay.
So if I turn on the TV, there's a million things I could be watching. If I turn this on and right out the gate, there's somebody busting in the room and Yeah, maybe they're having a few lines of dialogue of conversation to establish where we are. It could be about the soy burgers if you really want it to be. But I mean, if you had a point of like somebody sent us here to do this, okay, you can start off with that of, so and so wanted us to come here and make a scene or whatever. Cool. That tells me, what's going on. Now I'm questioning who is so and so that sent them there. What is the connection to all that? And then boom, night vision busts into the room and he's beating their asses and he's murdering them or whatever's happening. And I don't know why this dude is doing all of this, but I'm here for it and I want to know what's going to happen next. The way that it is at the moment, I would have changed the channel immediately, unless I have some sort of avid interest in soy burgers and the architecture of the bar. Unless I have that interest in that, I'm not going to stay around and watch this because it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. I'm going to go see, what's happening on House of the Dragon or whatever else is on TV at the moment. So yeah, make sure that you grab your reader by the throat as quickly as you can. It doesn't always have to be violence, even though I always prefer it to be violence. It doesn't have to be violence. It could be the middle of an argument. It could be somebody getting, I mean, I guess this is still violence, but somebody getting like hit by a car. It could be any number of things that are like, force me to pay attention. We said earlier in this conversation, a story is a conversation, right? And when you come into a room with a bunch of people having a conversation, what's the best way to get a conversation started is to say something that forces people to sit down and pay attention. If I'm telling you, hey, this morning I had cinnamon rolls and coffee, that's boring. If I tell you this morning I was slapped in the face by the postman and I'm not really sure why he did that, you're now, or no, this is why he did that. I'm more engaged in the conversation now because, again, this is violence. Apparently I'm partial to violence, but like some level of like, I'm grabbing you and I'm saying, hey, listen to me. And I feel that the best way to sharpen that first scene is to give me something that says, hey, listen to me, or hey, keep reading. And I think the fight is great. I think having a fight in that opening scene is great. I just think you might want to start it a little bit earlier. So that would be the first thing that I would adjust.
No, I mean, I like that. I actually like that because you kind of threw a creative challenge at me because now I'm thinking, can I edit this and still make it suspenseful, like build up the suspense and have everything else happen? Like, can I? Because at the moment it feels like I can't, but when you said that, it's like, whoa, maybe I can. Maybe there's a way to edit this and make it leaner and tighter and still have everything else that, like that you seem to be caught up with. And I assume if you do, a few 100,000 people will probably like it as well. So
for sure. And I mean, I think a great way to do that is, you talked about it already, about creating that level of mystery and suspense beforehand and then revealing. You can do it the same exact way. For instance, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say they're talking about a mob boss and they say that something like a hit is supposed to happen here tonight. Or he's like, they're talking about something regular. They could be talking about something mundane. In fact, that contrast is actually good. So you could talk about soy burgers for that matter. You could talk about, let's say one of them is pulling out a cigarette and the other guy's saying, oh, you can't smoke here. Or he's saying, when did you start smoking again? Or blah, 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 blah. And so now we have this little conversation. We don't know what people are. We don't know why they're doing it. And then all of a sudden, night vision comes in with a great wave of violence. And it's like, for a level of mundane action to be met with such an overt form of violence is a crazy level of, oh my God, why is this happening? In fact, I think that would probably even be better if it is a mundane conversation. It could be something even better, like, because I'm always a big fan of like when you have the henchmen talking about their families and stuff. So it's like, oh, my kids got ballet this week. And so it's like, oh, these are real people. And then suddenly this dude just comes in and murders them. And it's like, wait a minute, is this guy a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Why is he doing this? And now I gotta watch because I gotta know why he did that. And you don't need to tell me right at the beginning. I'll watch now because I want to know. You don't want to give me everything, but I hate this word, the ambiguity of not knowing, I think, is such a powerful thing. And as a fan of contrast, I love contrast. I love it when things are different. So I think the mundane behavior to a great overt act of violence is kind of really awesome. So yeah, that's what I would say with that. So yeah, kick that around, think about it, see if there's a way that you can give us a little bit of mundane for a very brief period of time. I'm literally talking maybe a few lines of dialogue. It doesn't have to be very long, less than a quarter of a page, I would say, for that. And then bring in the violence and bring in that whole thing. You did talk a lot about structure and things like that. So your slug lines, and for reader people who don't know what slug lines are the things that let you know where we are, and what time of day it is, and whether we're inside or outside. So the first slug line, you have bar, exit, night. So the problem with that is you have it right to an extent, it's just in the wrong order. So it's always exterior or interior first. So you tell us whether inside or outside
Mm,
first, and then it's where are we? So for this, it would be exterior, bar, night. That is how it would go. Yeah. So going forward, that's what I would do. Also, you wouldn't need the dashes. It would be exterior period, bar, and then you would have one dash that says night. You have dashes, but they're not throughout the whole thing. So it's exterior period, wherever we are, and then dash, day, night, same or continuous, whatever the thing is. So
okay.
that's just a brief thing. Another thing that I would add to you, again, I'm not sure if you weren't going to direct this and you weren't planning on doing what I would avoid camera direction. So
Mm,
when you're like close up, like there's a part where you're like close up on the menu, you could just say uh a glossy menu or just
mm,
a menu. You could just point it putting in the camera direction of like close up or the sound effect of these are all things that are typically done by the filmmaking team. So like close up is decided by the director and the DP. They're the ones who are going to decide if this is going to be a close up or not. As a writer and a writer only, you wouldn't really have that. So, and a lot of times directors and stuff
okay.
get kind of pissed off when people do that. So I would avoid it if you could. But yeah, so things like that. However, sound effects themselves are not bad. Just I would avoid the term put the sound effect or sound effect of. You can just write the sound effect. So if
Okay.
it's let's say a door slams, you can put it in giant letters, whoosh, that's fine. It's actually better than blocks of text. It makes it easier for people to read through and get through it. So if you want to say there was a sound effect of a computer booting up, you don't have to say that. You can just have whatever the sound effects of a computer booting up might be, or you can just say the whirring of a machine rides up, or whatever you want to say. That's going to help you to do that. Those are some of the like technical stuff. Another thing that drags the pacing for this is, and I do this a lot, sometimes I still do, it slips in there sometimes, but is the subject does X. So for instance, he notices, he looks, he steps, he walks, he turns. That
Okay.
slows down pacing. Cut that out and just say, you can say it the first time. If you said at the beginning of a paragraph, night vision lands on top of the roof. Okay, so now we already know who's on the roof. We know it's night vision. I don't need to say he does anything. I can just say moves to do this. Or if you do actually have to include what he's doing, do it so that it makes things faster so that I know information and it moves in motion. So like instead of he walks to the skylight, you can say he crosses the skylight scanning below for his target. That tells me what he's doing, it tells me why he's doing it. I understand all of that, and it's in a quick sentence. I think we said this with the last guest who did screenwriting. The best, and this was the best advice I've ever given, and I want to share it with you as well. The best way to do description in a screenplay is describe it as if you were describing a movie to a blind person. You cannot get caught up
Okay.
on all the details. So you can't be like he's walking by a red house with chipped paint flakes that are slowly cascading down to like that's way too much. You know what I mean? Like you have to describe it like you were talking to a blind person, and as you guys watch the movie in real time. You don't have time to get caught up on the details. He walks up to a red house, so on, and we're moving on. That's how all of your descriptions should be. Just quick, snappy, defend, like making sure that okay, I got it to my mind. We're moving on. And for something like this, which is a vigilante, there's fighting, there's violence. This should be quick. All the sentences should be short sentences. It should be snappy. I should feel like we're moving the whole time. I don't want to get caught up on anything. If this was a drama, that might be a little bit different because we do need those slow moments of reflection and thought. Or if you're writing a book, it's a little bit different because you can give that level of breathing room. But even in books where it's like action thrillers like Reacher or those kinds of not Reacher, well, yeah, Jack Reacher books and Orphan X and things like that, they're very snappy. The sentences are very snappy and it's very quick because it's meant to be a quick read. This felt like, oh, this should be a quick read for a script, but it feels way longer than it needs to. So just making sure that you cut down your sentences so that you only say what's absolutely necessary. I think in your first draft, it's totally fine if you want to have he looks, he does, whatever, just so that in your mind you have it. But when you're going back to edit it, try to figure out where can I cut those, where am I saying things like that I can cut out? Where are things where I can just get it as tight and as small as I possibly can. When I first started writing screenplays, that was also my thing was like I first started writing period doing prose. So when I switched over to screenwriting, it was like I wanted to tell everything. I wanted to tell how people were feeling. I wanted
Yeah.
to talk about the way the room looked, the five senses, and why what everything mattered. And then
Yeah.
I was met with the realization that it's like way too much, way too much. You just need to tell me what am I seeing, what am I hearing, and once I have that, we can move on. So that was that. The dialogue in general, I found that the dialogue was weak and a little generic. It felt like first draft dialogue. So like this is the dialogue you put in, but you plan on replacing down the line when you come up with something that's a little more snap. I'm using that word a lot, but a little more snappy, a little more um listen, a great example of people to study for dialogue are Aaron Sorkin, David Mamet.
Yeah, I'm a fan of him.
Yeah. Those 2 specifically are really, really great for dialogue. I mean, even Quentin Tarantino's pretty good with dialogue, but those 2 specifically are great if you wanna get an idea. I don't wanna give you the generic cheesy advice of like, listen to how people talk and because yes, that's true, but like it's also fucking stupid. So I don't wanna say that to you. I think that really it's totally fine for your first draft to be more generic dialogue, more I hate saying weak, but like just lower tier dialogue. It's okay to have it in your first draft because it allows you to kind of get through the story. That's the whole point. Get through the story and share your things and let people just know, okay, what are they supposed to be saying? What are they supposed to be? Okay, cool. Now that I've done that, what would make this line way better? Or would I want to cut this line of dialogue out and let subtext speak for its mind? Would let physical action or some sort of way that I could show this visually. This one, it felt like the characters were speaking without any real personality or intention. It felt like everybody was kind of the same. Like lines like the one line that really and I say this, keep in mind also, I know that we already gave our disclaimer, but I want you because you are a friend of mine, I want you to understand that everything that I say is out of love. But this particular line, a unique kind of pain, it got stuck in my craw a little bit because it felt like a placeholder level line. Like it was meant to be there until you found something better to say. Another one
Yeah.
was the line where and I'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the whole Kata and night vision conversation. But when they're driving the car and the statement about like if she was a man, she would have a boner right now. And then later on later on in that same scene where he makes a comment about like something about like her personal space and how she feels like it seemed like it was supposed to be flirty, but it came off to me as kind of creepy of like it just didn't seem real. Like I don't think that any man would ever just say that to a woman, even if they're friends. I feel like they would never say that to each other realistically without like her smacking him. And so it just felt really cringy in that moment. And I think, and again, it just felt like, oh, this is for the in the moment dialogue. Like we can plug something new in here and we can do something better later. And that's always fine. But at the moment, it just kind of sounded like Kata and Night Vision were talking like coworkers who were reading a script out loud. That's what it kind of felt like. I would say that the best way to do is make sure that you rewrite the dialogue with an agenda. A wonderful way of doing this is give both characters something that they want at the beginning of the scene. Know in your mind, you don't have to say it. Like you don't have to say, "Oh, I want this and I want this." Okay, now let's talk about it. It's more of just in your mind. What is something that each character wants and make sure that what they want is in direct opposition to each other, and then have everything that they say in the scene in service to that and them trying to achieve that thing that they want. In a lot of these scenes, the characters don't feel like they want anything per se. They're just kind of there to deliver their lines and they're out of here. This one, if you give it more like, okay, well, hey, maybe Kite is concerned about Night Vision's physical health and she wants him, maybe, I don't know, maybe she's been telling him forever to go get checked out or see a doctor or do something, and he's been just pushing her off. So her want is for him to get help. his want is for her to shut up and do the job in which he hired her to do. Now we have two opposing wants, and they're in your dialogue, even if they aren't talking about that specifically, if they go off and talk about pad thai or something else, but somehow that the underneath subtext is still the thing that they want, your dialogue is infinitely better. Dialogue is also important to reveal character. So when a character feels bland or generic, it means that the character is undeveloped. I don't know. Maybe you don't know. Maybe you're not sure. Or maybe you are sure, but you just haven't found a way to translate that into what you're writing. But you don't, the character isn't fully baked. And so when your dialogue doesn't reveal anything interesting about your character, it's just, oh, we're just saying words to get information out for the reader. So try to make sure that you, one, understand your characters better, and then getting us to understand what they want and getting us to know them better. Like I said, Kaida could be worried about him. She could be angry at him. She could be trying to rein him in. She could be trying to prove something. But most of the time, it just felt like she was narrating situations. And that makes it challenging. The next thing that stuck out to me was there didn't feel like there was any emotional engine for Night Vision. He didn't seem to have any fear, any wants, other than this case, not even a case, this issue that he's trying to resolve. Other than that, there was no wants. He didn't seem to have any doubts or hesitation. He really didn't seem to. He just didn't seem like a person. He just moved from like room to room, doing thing to thing, killing, fighting, doing whatever, repeat. That's kind of what it felt like. I would give him some internal conflict, something that's visible in the scenes. So maybe he's afraid to fail again, or maybe he's guilty about what he did to Akabano, or maybe he's hiding something from Kaida, or he's seeking some level of redemption, something that we can see, and that's an internal storm inside of him. I think would be really, really helpful to add to him as a character.
I was also going to say, like, because this kind of goes into my point of like the positive of he has this cool nonchalance that makes him a truly terrifying villain or anti-hero because he doesn't seem like a person. He doesn't seem like someone who's guided by an emotional or moral compass. While like these suggestions for like give him a fear, give him something that makes him hesitate would be interesting if that's not your goal. If your goal is to make him this terrifying person that is so damaged that he's not a person anymore and he doesn't have emotion, make sure that that backstory is like you touched on it in the scenes, but make sure that like it's pushed to the front of like this got even worse than what this is just showing here, and he's still carrying it with him in present time.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. The other thing we talked, I mentioned this before in a little bit more detail now. Kaida and Night Vision, they had very little dynamic, so their relationship to me felt flat. And I think it did because it felt like there was no tension, and there was no real vulnerability between them. It just kind of, to me, it felt like you were trying to create a level of closeness, or like the possibility that she could be a love interest of some kind or something like really close to him at some point. But it just felt like it felt like an office romance. Like these two were, they're friends who work together, and they could be more, but like they really only just focus on getting business done. And every once in a while they'll throw some flirtatious thing at one another, but mostly it's just we have things to do. I think building in a friction point would be helpful between them. So whether it be Kaida doesn't want him going out and doing this, maybe I don't know, maybe they're together already, and so they're having this constant conversation of like, I want you to stop doing this, and he's like, after we're done with this, and then it's always after we're done with this, that kind of thing. At least now, okay, now I see there's there's a debate that's happening, or maybe he doesn't want her to be involved. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe he's like, look, this is a suicide mission that ultimately one day I'm not going to come back from, and I don't want you to be locked in this. And she's like, no, I want this. I want to help. I want to do this, thing. Creating that, or she doubts his judgment, or he hides how injured he actually is, where he's asking for the pain meds and something like that. And then after that scene, we reveal that he pulls off his, maybe he has a hoodie on or whatever, and he pulls it off, and we reveal just how cut up and broken he really is. Something that shows that there's something going on beneath the surface beyond just go and look up this guy and be my, my guy, for lack of a better term, guy in the chair while I do all this superhero stuff. That way, we as an audience can invest more in this than we currently are. There's two more points I have. Sorry. The first one, flashback. There's a flashback specifically. I don't remember the page right this exact moment, but it was very, very confusing to me in the sense of because the way that it happened, and I think this could have just been a structured thing in the sense that like it didn't signify. So if you're going to do a flashback, you can do flashback dash junkyard night. So that way we know, okay, they're driving the car. Now there's a flashback. It's instead of it being like they're driving the car, suddenly night vision is murdering someone and then we're back in the car. It's like to me, I was like when I first read it, I was like, were they driving? Did he just jump out of the car and kill someone and then get back in the car? Like what's going on?
By murder.
Right then, yes.
So just let us know early on that like this is a flashback, and so that way we as the reader can be like, okay, cool, I know what's going on. I'm still here. I'm not taken out of the immersion of the story that you're telling. The last thing that I would talk about is episode arc structure. I think it's important to have a hook. We talked about that from the beginning, having that cold open being something, or not a cold open, but that opening being the fight, for instance. That's a great opening. Then you want to escalate from there. So you want to take it as, so if, for instance, if you have the fight be the thing, let the fallout of the fight be another point that happens. So when, if he beats up these guys or he kills these guys, perhaps they have other guys that are now pissed off. And now the boss who sent these guys is like, I want you guys to find this dude and I want you to kill him and I want you to, whatever. And so now they're coming, and we as the audience, we know, oh, there's this threat that's looming and that's coming. Meanwhile, you have, a midpoint. So this is where you can bring in your flashbacks and we can show up. So these guys that are coming to get our guy, he's, they should be careful because now that we've done this flashback, we know that he's capable of whooping these guys' asses. Not to mention the fact that he murdered those other guys, but like now we really know he can, like, he's not just busting in a place and taking a shotgun and doing what he would like. No, this dude can use a katana and he can do this. And so there's a clash coming. There's something really scary coming because you got this one guy who's been on a murder spree, it feels like, and now you got these other guys who are like a gang of guys that are like coming to kill him, and now they're heading for a crazy explosion of violence. So you're that, and then you bring it to your climax, and your climax is going to be maybe that explosion between these two opposing forces that seem to be crashing for each other, and then of course the fallout of that explosion that we were ultimately doing. And so you want to try to set it up in a way that like you're getting us to constantly escalate, constantly getting us ready, especially for this kind of story. But I think all stories it's relevant. But in this kind of story where it's like vigilantes and superheroes and supervillains and criminals and stuff like that, it's so important that you keep your reader or your viewer engaged from the beginning. And the only way to do that is to consistently increase and raise the stakes and make us feel like, oh, okay, something big's coming, something big's happening. And I didn't feel like that was the case. It kind of felt like room, hallway, trap, room, robot, room, long sequence, flashback, room, robots. And it's like, it's like, okay, cool. But there's no real escalation. There was no strategy and there was no internal or external conflicts other than people getting randomly murdered here and there for the pursuit of this one person who's trying to get to the bottom of something else. So yeah, I think movies like John Wick and things like that make it look really easy for that, where it's like you can just have a guy who is having a normal life, something horrible happens, and now he's just killing for the next 2.5 hours. It's like, yeah, but there's a level of escalation, there's a level of stuff of avalanche of threats and conflict that are coming that you may not even realize is happening. And that's just kind of the skill of experienced writers of being able to weave that in there. But those are some things that I would consider. Keep in mind, I feel like I took you on a long journey with that may not have been easy to follow in this moment. But when we do release the episode, you can always rewatch it, as well as the report we give you should be able to break some of this stuff down a little bit more clearly. But yeah, those would be the things that I noticed about what needed work. And so, yeah, I'm willing to open the floor to you to have, if you have any thoughts on that before we.
Well, not much. I mean, I will definitely give some thought to the dialogue and the characterization. I actually had not thought about those things before, about like what you suggested, the sort of opposing goals for Kaida and Night Vision. Like, that's interesting. I don't think I ever come across that before, but I'll think about it. I'll consider everything that you mentioned. Because it is truly, yeah, like you said, like sometimes I couldn't think of the line at the moment, But I
Mm.
knew that if I don't put something down, I will not be able to move ahead. So it's like, well, just put anything to keep going, like,
Yeah, of course.
because then you just get stuck on that page for like, and time goes by and you're still just trying to think of what to say.
And that right there is like a super, super key for people who get stuck with writer's block or creative blocks, because like that's exactly what helps you keep going, to keep getting words onto the page. So a lot of this is like, it's a lot of technical stuff, especially with screenplays. I learned how to write screenplays and edit screenplays after I learned how to write and edit prose. So it's like I understand like the two totally different worlds. And it's all very dependent on what you're planning to do with the screenplay. Like Jared was saying, are you trying to sell it? Are you trying to win a contest with it? Are you trying to give it to studio executives, or are you making it yourself? That's going to determine like which technical choices you make. And then a lot of this other stuff is like, you're right where you're supposed to be with your first draft. And this is just stuff to think about for your next drafts as it keeps getting marinated and refined and all that.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thank you for the feedback. Yeah, it was very useful. Yeah, definitely. I do struggle with describing action, because in prose you kind of have more space to do it, but in
Yep.
screenplays I'm always debating with myself. Am I saying too much or too little? Like I feel like I'm in that middle ground where I either over explain or under explain. I don't know
Mhm.
what the right amount of explanation is. So definitely have to think about that as well. How to say things without overstating and boring people with like particular. It's almost like I'm communicating directions on the set. It's almost like
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be there, but I'll put this down on paper so they'll know what I was trying to say. Kind of.
Yeah, and I get that. That makes sense. And I've had that same thought. I would just say that when it comes to, if you're not going to be there, don't describe it. Just let them be creative. Let them decide. It's one of those things of like, they say when you're directing actors, don't ever give them line readings. So don't tell them how to say a line, because it takes away from their ability to be creative. The same thing goes for writing a screenplay. When you are writing a screenplay and you give it to a director, you telling him close up here and pan this way and do a trucking shot this way. It's like you're telling him how to do his job, and nobody wants that. So I would avoid that. I would say the great, when you're talking about editing though, I would say overwrite it, right? More than you need to at first, because it's a lot easier to take things out and make it shorter than it is to not have enough and then have to figure out, how do I put more in? It's just more work for you later if you don't write enough from the beginning. So if you have to write 6 or 7 long paragraphs in your description of your screenplay from your first draft, totally fine. That way it's like, at least and you're like, okay, well, how can I cut this big paragraph down to 3 sentences that say the same thing? Because most of the time when we're writing, same as when we're talking, I'm master at this, we tend to over explain and over say things that we don't necessarily
Yeah.
need to say. And so it's much easier to walk that back after you've already done it than it is to try to do it from the beginning. Plus, it'll just take way too long when you're just trying to self edit yourself right from the beginning. And this is also why it's good to have editors and people like that for your screenplay, which I know a lot of people don't think about as much, but like having an editor for a screenplay is good for that reason. If you're stuck on dialogue or what's a better way to do this, because an editor can help you to say, okay, here's how I would cut this down, or here's what would make this easier to relay. So I think that's a good thing.
Or is this an ambiguity that is a contradiction that doesn't get explained later, or is this something that builds tension?
Exactly.
All right, then. Well, I will definitely take that into account. I will definitely go over it again. Yeah, especially the idea of like editing the beginning. If I can just chop that down a little, but still make it suspenseful, then I feel that sets a good place for everything that comes afterwards.
Yes.
Agreed. Normally we do talk about theme. You talked about how like you don't typically think about theme that way. And I feel like we touched on theme a little bit earlier already.
I was going to ask questions. I know that Jay, you mentioned sometimes you need like someone else to point it out to you, that like, oh,
Yeah.
this is thread that I see. So I guess I'll ask the question, like, did you have anything in mind that you were hoping came across, or do you want to know what kind of threads we picked up?
Well, go ahead and let me know what threads you picked up on. Yeah, because I don't really know. Like, I don't know what to ask. Yeah.
Sure. I'll say like, and this was more like me just spitballing, but some threads that I picked up on was, from first glance, it seems like we have the classic tragic anti-hero backstory. We both admire Night Vision for like his strength and how cool all of his gadgets are, but we also sympathize with him for his pain and the anger that drives him to do the things that he does, because he's obviously in pain and bitter about all this tragedy that happened. So some questions that started like popping up in my mind of like, oh, I wonder how this is going to factor into this character and the decisions he makes and the conversation that we start seeing happen as we watch this TV episode. Some of the questions was like, how does tragedy impact your idea of what is right and what is wrong? Or how do you cope with loss and pain? And do the ends justify the means? Because obviously, like, he's justifying to himself everything that he's doing, even though it seems so needlessly violent to us. So does he have an ends that like is his ultimate goal of, in order to right this wrong that happened to me, I need to get this done, and it doesn't matter who gets kind of stomped on in the process?
Yeah, I guess there is some of that. Yeah. And because this is one episode of a series, maybe the idea is that he begins to realize no matter what he does, like, he really was not going to achieve any kind of peace because, let's say he gets rid of Cabano, then Cabano has friends that are like him. If he goes after them, they have friends also. Like, it's just like a never ending thing. Maybe over the course of the series, he begins to just, okay, like, instead, I should redirect my energy towards rebuilding my practice, what I was doing before, come up with something of my own that I can patent and copyright and sell, and maybe even, I don't know, do some good. Like, I don't know, use it to create a breakthrough that improves things somehow in the world. So maybe that's what happened. Maybe this is where he's at now. He's at the early phase where he just wants, like, he's just sort of like he just wants to make chaos. He wants to make trouble. He wants to just break things and hurt people. And maybe over the course of the series, that will stop. That will change. He'll start redirecting his energy someplace. And instead of killing people, he'll steal their money. He'll take their money and use that money for something.
Yeah, so maybe the character arc could be digging into that phrase, that hurt people hurt people.
Okay, yeah, that's exactly, yeah.
Yeah, demonstrate
Very
that.
good.
Here's some good ideas to get you started.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah.
I think for me, the theme that came out was that your past eventually comes back for you. It feels like Night Vision's unfinished fight with Pavano's it set the emotional foundation. The trap that he walks into was engineered specifically for him. The surveillance, all the robots, the labs, all of it felt like it was engineered to confront his unresolved violence. And you could feel that ultimately what was being said is you can't outrun the consequences of the life that you choose. And so I think, or the life that he chose, I should say. So I think that that's kind of the theme that I picked up from it and the bit that I wrote. So yeah.
Yeah, there is something of that, like that little exchange between them at the end. I was hinting at the idea that maybe like how he talks about how he's got all this money put into all these breakthroughs. I was taking, how like rich people are big into transhumanism now in the present. I was like, okay, take that idea but transport it back to then, and it would probably be like a clunky thing. It would be just a voice on a mainframe or a bunch of mainframes. So I was putting the idea forward that maybe he'll survive this also, but not by the next time they run into each other, he'll be just that. He'll just be just a voice from a metal box.
Yep. That's another
It
cool
becomes
idea.
absurd almost. Yeah. So maybe that's kind of where it's going. But again, like maybe the idea is like, well, yeah, like, okay, let me just do something else. Like this doesn't work. This just creates more problems. Let's just do something else. Like they have all this money. Maybe I can steal that money. Like Kaida, I guess she's a hacker. She's not a hacker, but she's doing information, like information retrieval in that era from the late 80s, early 90s, where computers work very differently. So maybe she gets the idea to do that. And it's like, oh yeah, we should have done that from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
After, dozens of people killed later and explosions and mayhem and all that. So maybe that's a theme in that as well. Like, like the most direct, sensible thing to do. They couldn't do that because he's so blinded by anger and rage. So
Yep.
maybe that's one thing. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of this is trial and error as we brainstorm and come up with different ideas, and as like your inspiration goes and you get different ideas, you try them out, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then you try something else. But a lot of the answer to does this work or not is going to come back to your theme. So now that you have a first draft written, sit with it and see if it speaks to you specifically about like, with the characters that you created and their backstories, what is kind of bubbling to the surface of this is the main conversation that we're having. This is the main conflict that we're digging into. And then that answer is what's going to direct your decision making with like, does this idea work? Does this not? For anything else that comes up.
All right, very good. I will do that definitely. Thank you guys. I appreciate the time, the cross-examining, the autopsy, I guess.
It's so fun to get to meet you in person, and also like we say this every episode, and it's important to say every episode, but we totally recognize how much bravery it takes to put your baby, something that you wrote that has your raw
Yes.
beat in it, in front of other people and say tear it apart. And the fact that you had that bravery and you showed up here and took like all of these suggestions and critiques is like truly amazing, and truly we thank you and honor you for being willing to do that.
Oh, I not at all. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate that taking the time to do this because I feel like in my media environment, I don't have people willing to do that. They're not particularly interested in that. So I appreciate that you guys are willing taking the time to do it today. And we got some content out of it for everybody to use in any way they like.
For sure.
Definitely. Yeah. For any of our listeners, if you learned something here that you didn't know before, or if anything fascinated you, leave a comment. Let's continue the conversation and give a share to someone else who maybe is into screenplays or writing and storytelling. And let's share good information and keep these conversations going about good stories.
Absolutely. So, with all that said, thank you so much for being here, for joining us. As Jaylon said, thank you for listening. For those that are listening, if you need assistance with your story, want this kind of feedback, feel free to sign up for our, which we'll put the link in our show notes, but like sign up for the Let's Fix Stories episode. We would love to have you on and talk about your story. If you're beyond that and you're just ready to start working on the actual thing, you can always hire us as editors. We'd be more than happy to help you do that. Or if you're not quite there yet, but you want to figure out how to get from page 1 to the end, we can help you with that as well. So again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much, guys. Bye.